Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar this morning. My name is Rachel Biffin. I'm the Acting Executive Director for the Office for Prevention of Family and Domestic Violence, located within the Department of Communities, and here today to introduce you to the Coercion Hurts campaign and the webinar that we've coordinated to provide some additional information to the sector. I would just like to start by acknowledging country. So we are joining you here today from Whadjuk Noongar Boodja, but I would like to extend my deep respects to the traditional custodians throughout Western Australia and the country that you may be joining from this morning. I guess it's important to acknowledge not only elders past, present, and also emerging leaders, but also the continuing connection to land, waters, and community that Aboriginal people have across Western Australia. I would also like to acknowledge victim survivors, acknowledging that many of you this morning may have a lived experience of family and domestic violence. We know the devastating impact of family violence, not only on individuals, but also families and communities, but also the strength and resilience of both children and adult victim survivors who have survived and continue to survive the ongoing experiences and impacts of violence. So it gives me great pleasure to give you a bit of an overview for our webinar agenda this morning. Very briefly going to introduce you to our colleagues from the Department of Premier and Cabinet who have been a partner in development of the Coercion Hurts campaign to talk a little bit around the campaign overview. We also have Caddy Kraslin this morning, who, as you know, is the Commissioner for the Office for Victims of Crime, who's going to speak a little bit around the intersect of the family violence campaign and some of the legislative reforms. And shortly joining us, we'll also have Dr. Alison Evans, who will be speaking to some practice considerations for the sector. And we have the great pleasure of Ms. Cherie Shonian joining us this morning to talk about her lived experience of coercive control and family violence, with ample opportunity for Q&A. So you would have seen a little note in the chat there around just encouraging you to invite questions. And if there's a particular question that you like, you're welcome to thumbs up and it'll bump it up a little higher up the list for us to answer. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce both Almora Boucher and Nadia from Department of Premier and Cabinet. You won't be able to see their lovely faces behind the scenes, but they've prepared some slides to have a little bit of a conversation around the Coercion Hurts and the Family Domestic Violence campaign. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everybody. It's Nadia Murado from the Department of the Premier and Cabinet. And as Rachel mentioned, we partnered with Department of Communities to bring to life the Coercion Hurts campaign. So we could go to the next slide, please. Yep, so today we'll just go through the purpose of the campaign. We'll give you an overview of it if you haven't seen all the materials that are out there. Look at the campaign messaging, how we've consulted with stakeholders, and our next steps. And then, as Rachel said, there's time for questions at the end of the webinar. So the purpose of the campaign was, as you know, the government's committed to reducing family and domestic violence and launched the statewide campaign to raise awareness of coercive control. The Coercion Hurts campaign really had two main objectives: to promote an understanding of FDV and challenge outdated and dangerous views, and educate Western Australians about coercive control and the associated behaviours. We narrowed down onto coercive control through insights from the Family and Domestic Task Force, as well as consulting with people with lived experience, the wider sector and Aboriginal stakeholders. We also conducted focus groups with community members, which provided us with some really rich nuggets of gold, really, in how we were able to narrow down the campaign to coercive control. So we really appreciated all the feedback and the time provided by stakeholders, and as there'll be plenty more opportunities to feed in over the 2-year period of this campaign. So the campaign overview, we launched on the 30th of September, and as I mentioned, we'll be in market for 2 years over different phases. We expect that to be 4 different bursts of paid media, but we do have the online hub, which will be ongoing. And I do want to just shout out to Cherie for a huge thank you, Cherie, for being part of our launch. You were amazing, and you know, I was just in awe of your bravery and your courage. So really, really appreciate that from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
So the audience, and this again, we we decided, okay, we're going to go with coercive control as our main focus, but then it was like, who is our primary audience? And the insights we got was that we need to really focus on the general population with men aged 25 to 54 years. And of course, we wouldn't forget that we had a secondary audience of females, Aboriginal people, culturally and linguistically diverse people of the same age group. This is not to say that we're not thinking about other people beyond those age groups. It's just that when you do a paid media campaign, for it to be effective, we need to narrow it down to some point. Our media placement and channels, online videos, social and digital media. We have out-of-home billboards, both static and digital. We have radio, press, and we have search engine marketing as an always-on channel. As I mentioned, we created some new web pages on wa.gov.au, and the idea was to make this an online information hub that would live beyond the life of any paid campaign, that we could continue to optimise and add to and include a range of information and resources. Our call to action was to learn more, including where to seek support, and as I mentioned, we've got that dedicated URL there. So now I hand over to Almora, who will be able to take you through all the materials and the campaign overview.
Thank you, Nadia. So I'm Almora Boucher, and I'm one of the Deputy Directors here at the Department of Premier and Cabinet, and we had the great pleasure of being able to partner with Department of Communities to tackle a campaign that we all felt so passionate about, and we really wanted to do the best job we were able to. In an ideal world, as Nadia said, you know, we acknowledge that there are different groups and different people that this the FTV impacts, but from a campaign perspective, we really needed to be able to narrow it down. So it was amazing that we were able to really look at the desktop research that's out there, as well as stakeholder information and feedback that we gathered as part of it, which not only was really important when it came to developing the messaging and the who we should be talking to as part of this campaign, but also in regards to what we should actually depict as part of the different creative aspects of it. Being so mindful that coercive control really is that pattern of behaviour, and that it can happen in any home across Western Australia, that we wanted to be able to demonstrate different types of people that are experiencing it as well as perpetrating it, as well as different, I guess, examples of coercive control, which is why we decided to go with showing two different couples in very different settings so that we could use different examples to depict it. So if you could just go back to the previous slide, just for those that haven't been able to see it, in an ideal world, you've all would have seen these videos already, but just so that we are all referencing the same material when we're talking through the different campaign examples, I'll just ask that we can share the first one, which we have gone through as the young couple. So we'll show you the video for that one, as well as the family depiction as well. And just while they get that all together, it was really great to be able to get the feedback from everyone at Department of Communities that has such experience in this regard, to be able to demonstrate real life everyday examples and situations of coercive control. But again, from a communications perspective, we at times did have to just make sure that some of the different aspects were a little bit more obvious than what someone's lived experience might be, just to be able to make sure that someone viewing it without any knowledge or understanding of coercive control would be able to see those behaviours and understand that they were not appropriate. Shall we give it a go? So it seems that the sound isn't working, but luckily everything is closed caption. So any dialogue on screen you are able to read on the screen. And then the campaign resources are available on the new online hub as well. So if you would like to, you can go and easily find the links there that go through to our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for playing those. So we can go to the next slide now. So those were the two videos, and those were, I guess, the hero aspects of the campaign. So we have 30-second versions of each of them and cut down to 15 and 6 seconds so that they can be played online as well as social and digital media. On screen, you can then see different examples of how the same couples are being demonstrated in different ways for out of home, like such on billboards. We'll have examples of it on transit, like on the back of buses, as well as in shopping centres. You'll be able to see it on those digital billboards that they have. So this is just to show you the different ways that we're able to use the same creative and execute it in different ways. We can now move online to the next slide, which is just giving you an overview about the online hub that was created. So it was created to educate people about family and domestic violence. We wanted to make sure that there was information easily available on the website for bystanders, those experiencing FDV, people worried about their own behaviour, as well as obviously providing support services in one centralised location as well. Topics and user experiences were informed by sector as well as jurisdictional research, and that really gave us insight as to how we should best present the information so that it's as accessible as possible for different people coming to the online hub for information. And based on the research that we conducted, all pages feature a quick exit button, as well as alert banners, signposting to helplines as well, just so that people are able to access information in as safe a way as possible. We can go through to the next slide. And this gives an example around, we have the online hub itself, but we wanted to make sure that we had a really clear coercive control landing page that people could go to directly from the campaign materials. So the campaign does direct people through to this coercive control landing page, which provides information for people to learn about coercive control, especially around different aspects such as how to identify the behaviours, how to have a conversation with someone experiencing or perpetrating coercive control, for people who are worried about their own behaviour, as well as help and support services. So the webpage URL is wa.gov.au/coercive control. That's also the page that you can go to if you do want to access campaign resources, if you want to share them amongst your own networks, or even for you to be able to just go through and have a look at those videos with the sound on as well. And so for the campaign period, this does have the videos that are linked on there, as well as some imagery referencing the different talent that we've used as part of the campaign. But we will continue to optimise and review the web content in a similar way that we are doing for the campaign creative as well throughout the 2-year period, just to make sure that it keeps up with expectation and user experience as well. We can move on now through to the stakeholder materials. So when we were developing the stakeholder materials, we really the materials were as accessible as possible. So we developed materials translated into Aboriginal languages, as well as we have culturally and linguistically diverse materials available, which we went through a consultation to make sure that that was relevant for the different communities. We've also developed we developed a easy read document for low literacy communities, just to make sure that different people coming to this site for information can have it in the way that's going to be as useful and beneficial for them. As part of the materials, we developed different assets. So we had posters and social media tiles for cold communities, as well as some audio recordings, which is part of our media plan as well. We've got Aboriginal plain English translated poster and social media tile, as well as some audio recordings that have been used for Aboriginal radio networks across the state as well as the easy read document that I spoke of. So I do really encourage you to go and have a look at the resources, see if they're of value to your networks and your communities, just to be able to make sure that the information's there and people know that they can go to this resource and this hub for additional information in an expanded way than what the messaging have been provided as part of the campaign as well. And these are the different examples of the Aboriginal content. So we've got the poster and social media tile, as well as the radio script, which was something that we were able to develop and refine in consultation with some key stakeholders, which, as Nadia said, that we've been so appreciative of the stakeholder consultation and engagement and feedback we've received as part of the development of this. It's really been such a pivotal part in us being able to deliver something that is as relevant and accessible as possible for all different community members. And this is an example of the Easy Read document. That this was a learning experience for us to be able to condense and I guess communicate information that may be quite complex, such as coercive control, even to be able to make that as simple and accessible as possible. And we developed that in collaboration with Development Disability WA, and it's available on the website within the Stakeholder Toolkit section. And it really provides information about coercive control for low literacy audiences using text and images to be able to communicate the messaging in combination. And I will now hand back to Nadia, who will be able to go over our next steps.
Thanks, Almora. So that brings us to the end of our presentation, but I just want to let you know, as we are at the beginning of a 2-year journey, so we definitely welcome any feedback and insights from you and your networks. Please feed them through to us. We're always looking to optimise the campaign and the online hub. If there's any resources that you think we should be, any information, please send them through. You would have noticed that the Aboriginal assets looked a little different to the rest of the campaign. That was based on feedback we had from Aboriginal stakeholders that the cracking effect wouldn't resonate, and it was also that there are some more nuanced challenges that are unique to the Aboriginal community. So that's why we engaged with an Aboriginal agency as well as Aboriginal Interpreting WA to look at how we could make that more relevant. What we're doing now is actually starting the development of a bespoke and more tailored campaign for Aboriginal people. So that's under development at the moment. So we'll keep you posted with that one. And yeah, please support us in distributing the material amongst your networks, feedback any insights. We're very open to taking those on. So thank you very much. I'll now hand to Katie Creslin as the Commissioner for Victims of Crime.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I don't have any slides, so I'm sorry about that. I'd like to also acknowledge the custodians of the land on which I'm speaking from, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and recognise that people are joining this webinar from across the state, and acknowledge custodians of the land across the state that we live in. It's really important to have the opportunity to speak today, both continuing to raise awareness of the impact of coercion and control in the community is important, and recognising the depth and breadth of this behaviour is necessary if we're going to make legislative changes. It is important to have this campaign to support the pathway to criminal offences. The justice system, I think everybody knows, is often a very late step in a person's awareness that they're a victim of family and domestic violence, particularly when there is no physical violence. So many victims have contacted our office over the years to ask us if they're a victim of family violence when the violence is coercion and control, and there isn't physical violence associated with it. And given the insidious nature of these behaviours, that they start with small acts, which often don't seem controlling on their own, that they take time to form the pattern which starts to control someone's life, the fear that comes with this develops over time. So it's important that this campaign and others that we're involved with show the community how these small acts develop into overwhelming control. So the awareness campaign, I think everyone here may be aware, is part of a package of reform against coercion and control. So there is also work being done to increase the knowledge of that across the justice system, and that's part of the wider training packages. Also important in the judicial justice system, we generally focus on the sort of high profile people, which is the judiciary and the lawyers and the police, and don't always remember that the justice system is such a large system and involves so many points. So we're also focusing with this training on other participants as well, So prison officers, community corrections officers, and this campaign as part of the community will also be part of that education. But it's important that prison officers, for instance, understand the behaviours and that they can recognise when they're being used by offenders in the prison system. That, you know, the request, I only want to find out if the kids are okay, which goes to an officer which may appear innocuous, actually has a deeper meaning, and that phone call, if it's made, is part of maintaining control over the victim. So we want to be really clear about that education campaign. And I'll just give a brief overview. The work towards criminalisation is continuing. And I know that this causes some consternation because of the time frames, but just a quick overview for you on some of the time, and that this is a 2-year campaign which fits within those time frames. So we look at jurisdictions which developed a standalone offence. In New South Wales, it was 1 year and 5 months from a recommendation to legislation. In Queensland, it was 2 years and 3 months until they developed a legislation, but they still haven't commenced that offence. So it's still underway in those jurisdictions. In Scotland, it was 5 years, and it was 6 years in Northern Ireland. So a 2-year campaign is a really important component to this development. Scotland and Northern Ireland, as I've said, took 5 and 6 years respectively, and their communities are far less diverse than ours, and did not have and don't have a First Nation population, which has a history of colonisation and dispossession. And we recognise in the legislative and criminal space that we have an ongoing need to consult with our First Nations sector, and to make sure that what we do is the appropriate thing. Scotland had a domestic awareness campaign and training. Northern Ireland had awareness training, operational processes and IT, and also a public awareness campaign that ran from 2021 to 2023 called #StillAbuse, which focused very much on coercion and control. So this 2-year campaign is fitting within this pathway process that we've articulated before, but also what we understand from, in particular, Scotland, who's done a review. Their review found that what was needed to ensure that criminalisation of coercion and control supported victims was improved training and a better understanding of what constitutes family violence, and in particular coercion and control, improved knowledge, communication and information sharing, and that this is public and professional awareness of what the Act had and what was in it, choice empowerment and taking a victim-centred approach, expanding support for victims and witnesses, quicker processes and ensuring safety. So we've taken on board those findings from those reviews of the ongoing criminal actions in other jurisdictions to inform what we're doing. Just a number of people may have seen this, that the Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research in New South Wales, otherwise known as BOXAR, have produced their first data sheet on the new offence of coercion and control in New South Wales, which commenced on the 1st of July. So since the commencement of that offence, there have been 56 incidences of coercion and control reported to the New South Wales Police across July and August. At this point, 2 charges have been laid, but none have proceeded to a finalisation in court yet. What they did and was looked in the report talked about coercion and control incidents can include 1 or more types of controlling behaviour, and on average there was 3 per reported victim. The most common behaviours recorded were harassment, monitoring and tracking, which 55% recorded. Being shamed, degraded or humiliated was 50%. threats and intimidation 46%, financial abuse 39%, social isolation 38%, and then physical violence 30%, and then it goes down. So they were the key findings from New South Wales. That's their first report, and we'll keep a close watch on theirs. So just quickly in WA, what we're doing at the moment, in addition to training the communication plan and looking at recommendations from other reviews, people where we've updated the definition of coercion and control in the Restraining Orders Act, and we're just waiting for proclamation now. We are conducting a review of breaching of restraining orders in the office, and we'll provide advice to government, hopefully by the end of the year, definitely by the end of the year. We're reviewing the Family Violence Legislation Reform Act, in particular the persistent family violence offence and why it's not being charged, and reviewing the section on jury directions about family violence. We've reviewed the intimate image legislation because this has large impacts in coercion and control through the threat offences. Working with the Commonwealth on the forced marriage, and a number of people today may have participated in that consultation. We're making amendments to government to present to government on the Victims of Crime Act, and the government has introduced the Evidence Act bill, which has increased the range of special witnesses as a mandatory process to include family and domestic violence victims in the superior courts, to make more effort in the improper question component so that the court must disallow a question if it's misleading, confusing, annoying, harassing, intimidating, offensive, oppressive, or repetitive, so to give victims greater protection during examination, and also the introduction of body-worn camera evidence that will allow police officers to record statements of family violence using on-location cameras, and that this recording can then be admitted as the complainant's evidence in chief in a family violence prosecution. All of these steps are required for us to continue to progress on to a criminal offence. Also, the system reform plan that a large number of people are very much aware of the key components. The key finding from the Scottish review was improved information sharing in this space. It's a key component of the reform plan, and it's a real necessity for us in being able to successfully prosecute coercion and control. Also, the focus on an effective disclosure scheme which assists victims in coming forward earlier rather than later, but also provides information on various aspects of family and domestic violence, and in particular on coercion and control. And finally, the focus on the role and nature of a justice advocate who can assist victims move through the justice system. So links to the online hub and the campaign will also be placed on the Victims of Crime website, knowing that some people will type that in straight into Google, and that will take them to a link which will allow for a direct link back to the online hub. So I know that's a lot of information, but I just wanted to reassure and reiterate that this process is going on a step-by-step process as outlined in the legislative report. And this step here, the public campaign, we know is probably one of the most important steps that we need to take. So I'm happy to answer questions at the end, but I'm going to now hand over to Alison, who is going to talk through some of the practitioner components. But thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Caddy. I too just wanted to acknowledge that I'm meeting today on Wajak Noongar Budja, and to pay my deep respects to Aboriginal people, past, present and also emerging, and just to affirm that I'm a strong supporter of the statement from the heart too. And I too just wanted to recognise victim survivors and also their families and communities as well. Families and communities, feel a huge sense of responsibility when it comes to people experiencing family and domestic violence, and and heavy load as well. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Coercive control is underpinning it is a huge amount of substantive knowledge and evidence, which I'm certainly not going to be able to do justice to today. So I will be just providing a very brief overview of coercive controlling behaviours in the context of family and domestic violence, and also the strong role that fear plays, and just very briefly too some practice implications too. In short, domestic and family violence is the mental, physical and or sexual abuse by a partner or ex-partner or family member. In most cases, it is experienced by women and children and is perpetrated by men. Domestic and family violence is serious and sustained and can be life-threatening. Domestic and family violence doesn't always include acts of violence, although these are often present or remain an ever-present threat. Central to Evan Stark's concept of coercive control are the use of intimidation, isolation and control. He argues that domestic violence is a liberty crime, stripping away a victim's sense of self and more broadly violating their human rights. Stark asserts that the pattern nature of coercive control must be understood in the context of gender inequality and other forms of inequality and oppression, and that failure to recognise this structural violence will lead inevitably to a diluted response to coercive control. Coercive control is complex and strategies used by a perpetrator are nuanced, frequently linked to the minutiae of an individual's relationships and the microdynamics of power and control. Johnson described it as intimate terrorism. While it infiltrates many areas of the relationship, it can continue undetected by outsiders. Next slide, please. A question still commonly asked is, why don't people who are being abused in intimate relationships simply leave? In answer to this, it is important to understand the fear experienced by those suffering it. Framing domestic abuse as everyday terrorism helps to understand how fear works. It highlights the frequency and severity of domestic and family violence, the serious effects of the fear that it invokes, and the control that this fear makes possible. Again, domestic and family violence and the corrosive effects of the fears of those who suffer it are not simply an issue of individual or family conflict. They relate to and are sustained by social and economic inequalities at the level of society. The frequency and prolonged nature of domestic and family violence, the psychological aspects of this control, and the setting in which domestic and family violence takes place all help to explain these higher levels of fear and trauma. The research demonstrates that fear in domestic and family violence is distinctive. Being abused in a domestic setting by an intimate partner shapes the nature of the immediate fear. It also leads to chronic fear, which builds up over the long term and leads to significant trauma and negative effects on health and well-being. The social and physical entrapment and isolation, which often accompany, reinforces these fears and make help seeking more difficult. Fear is often a key reason for not leaving, and this fear is rational and it's justified. The psychological and emotional control that result from fear are a key way in which domestic and family violence works. Keeping another person in a state of chronic fear does not require physical violence to be used all of the time or at all. Using and playing on fear is common by abusers and is made possible because of their intimate knowledge of the person they are abusing. Concern for children is central to the fears of many people who experience domestic and family violence. Children are often victimised by the abusive parent and frequently witness abuse. Children are sometimes deliberately used in one parent's abuse of another. Children are often a key reason for the parent being abused not leaving, as well as eventually being a key reason for leaving. This apparently contradictory situation is explained by the complex and risky nature of the decision to leave. Considerable strength and courage are required to live with domestic and family violence, and these emotions are experienced alongside fear. Excuse me. After separation, fear often continues. Recovery and re-establishment are long processes. Abuse often continues after separation and leads to continuing or heightened fear. Trauma, an effect of chronic fear, may fully surface only after separation from the abuser. Next slide, please. Current systems focus on single incidents of physical violence and a reduction in repeat victimisation. But this belies the complex and sophisticated mechanisms of controlling behaviours that are often part of an abuser's behaviours. Given the invisibility of many of the mechanisms of coercive control to those outside the relationship, it can be very difficult to identify, assess, and respond to in practice. The impact of living with persistent fear, the insidious nature of the abuse, combined with the severe emotional distress this can generate, have become defining features of coercive control, yet it is harder to identify and much less visible. There is a sophisticated interrelationship between coercive control and physical violence, suggesting that coercive control is the more likely of the two to evade identification and understanding by service providers and first responders. And penetrating nature of abusive behaviours that ultimately lead to women being held in place by fear of threat, violence and retaliation can evade professional judgment and frequently do not factor in decision-making or assessment processes. Recognising a pattern of coercive control requires an appreciation of the wider gender context of power relations and other relevant dynamics in intimate partnerships. The availability of historical information and a readiness to link a diverse range of abusive behaviours. For frontline responders, this evidence is rarely immediately apparent and often requires them to ask the right questions of victim survivors. In the absence of resources and knowledge, service providers may fail to identify this behaviour, disproportionately emphasising physical violence as a marker of immediate high risk. However, evidence suggests this alone is not an accurate predictor of domestic violence homicide. Recent separation, weapon presence, and high levels of control are more likely to lead to threat to life, underscoring the significance of coercive control. Too often, coercive control is simply a precursor to the more important physical abuse or a characteristic of abusive behaviours that are only recognised after serious harm has been suffered. The vast range of behaviours that can be viewed as controlling or coercive may undermine a service provider's confidence to label coercive control as such. Furthermore, the broad range of potential behaviours that can form a pattern of coercive control imbue by default discretion on the part of the responder in their decision to record certain perpetrator behaviours. At times of limited resources, service providers may be less able to search for this pattern. In addition, even when specialist agency practitioners do recognise coercive control, they are not always in a position to respond to it effectively. Until the family and domestic violence system is enabled to reconceptualise domestic and family violence as both physical and non-physical, both episodic and continuous, the failure to recognise the significance of apparently low-level incidents of domestic and family violence will persevere. A shared understanding of coercive control across the family and domestic violence system is critical. The commitment to multi-agency cooperation in today's domestic violence prevention environments makes differing definitions impractical and potentially leads to less obvious forms of domestic and family violence being missed, discounted, or ignored. The lack of a shared understanding of coercive control can cause, or at least facilitate, discretion on the part of frontline services about how to record and manage incidents of non-physical abuse. In a time of limited resources and large caseloads, the organisational incentive to minimise the recording and importance of non-physical abuse is considerable. Coercive control is an issue that requires the attention of all agencies and professionals engaged in the family and domestic violence system, and it must be understood that how one agency responds to coercive control can affect that of another. Assessment for a pattern of coercive control is critical for best practice in domestic and family violence. Next slide, please. Workforce development, of course, across the family and domestic violence system is necessary to ensure that a proper understanding of coercive control and of domestic violence becomes fully and consistently embedded in practice in a culturally appropriate manner. Victim survivors are often in danger when they seek support or may face pressure from their partner, family, or community not to report domestic and family violence. Sorry, I'm just going to have to quickly make sure I'm plugged in because it's saying I'm about to run out of power. Sorry. Sorry, it's all plugged in, so hopefully it's okay. This makes it vital that services are easily accessible to reduce barriers for people who already face great challenges in seeking and getting help. Domestic and family violence services face greater demand than they can meet, reducing the options for victim survivors. Services need to be available and, crucially, culturally safe to create accessible pathways to safety. Thank you. Sorry about that interruption. It was saying that I was about to, my laptop was about to die. Thank you very much for your time. I just wanted to hand over to the wonderful Cherie Sconian now, please. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Cherie and I am a survivor of family and domestic violence. The reason I say I'm a survivor and not a victim is because, as we see in the statistics, about one woman a week is being killed by the hands of her current or former partner. We have already suppressed that average, I guess you could say. I do also, though, truly believe that if I had stayed in my relationship, I would have become a part of that statistic. So I'm here to talk to you today about my lived experience with family and domestic violence. So my experience began with FDV probably when I was about 9 years old, when my own mother was in an abusive relationship, not with my father, but with somebody else. So from a very young age, I witnessed all different forms of abuse. Her relationship was mainly physical, but that's what I can remember being as young as I was. I still actually see this man, as my mum had 2 children with him. The relationship now is a little bit awkward, but I get along with him for the sake of my siblings and for my niece and nephew, who my sister has gone on to have. So my relationship actually began when I was 16 years old. I'm not sure how I'm going to suppress 16 years worth of family and domestic violence into 15 minutes, but I will sort of point out some of the key moments that I do remember in this relationship. A lot of the memories that I have of this relationship have been suppressed. So whilst I do remember some things, there are moments that I don't recall at all. So during my 16 years of my relationship, there was physical abuse and sexual abuse, but there was also a lot of silent abuse, your coercive control, your emotional abuse, your financial abuse. And I always say that the emotional scars that I carry are much deeper than any physical scar that I have on my body. With coercive control, I believe that it changes over time. So when I was 16 years old, I fell in love with this boy and he was my world. But I started to notice small little things. And yes, I probably should have gotten out then, but as I said, I was in love, so I stayed. One of the first things that I do remember was he'd ripped up my year 12 ball photos because I'd gone with a friend and he didn't like that. But I hadn't even met him before I'd even gone to the ball, so it wasn't like I could bring him. So he ripped up my ball photos and screamed and yelled, and I chased him down the street. And yeah, followed him down the street, and chased him, and I couldn't be without him, which was really weird because we'd only been together for a short moment of time. Then the control started happening with what I was allowed to wear, whether it was my skirt was too short or not short enough, whether my top was too low cut or not low cut enough. There were moments when he would like me to be covered up and then not covered up. When he wanted me covered up, it was because he didn't want anybody looking at me or thinking, bad thoughts about me. And then as we got older and then I started working and we moved in together, he started to take control of finances and then who the friends I was allowed to have, because I'd gotten my driver's license. So the friends I was allowed to have, when I was allowed to see them, even when or where I was allowed to see my family events, which ones I was allowed to attend and which events I wasn't allowed to attend. So that sort of happened as time went on. I always was walking on eggshells if there was a family event coming up. I basically had to ask permission to go and see my own family. The financial abuse was one of the major key factors of abuse in our relationship, the silent abuse that I call it, because nobody could see it happening except me. I worked our entire relationship. I did have 2 children to this man. I took only a year off with my first child and 3 months off with my second because I needed to continuously have an income. He worked on and off, so the income from him wasn't always there. I had to pay for all the bills, all our rent, our food, everything. There were times when I was making, a decent amount of money and it would be payday and we would both have to end up sitting in front of a phone or a laptop to wait for midnight to happen. That was because I was either trying to transfer money out of my bank account to put away or him transferring it out to gamble away. So there was those types of financial abuse. He racked up a $250,000 debt for me to pay, which I left about in 2015, I left, and I only just finished paying that off a couple of years ago. So there was that type of financial abuse. He would also, as I said, gamble our money away, but he was also doing methamphetamine. So a lot of the money that we had was spent on that. I was never allowed to say, no, you can't have any money. If I did, I would ultimately be punished for it in a physical way. He would hold all of my bank cards. I had to get credit cards out, car loans, as I said, and I've just finished them paying off. So the financial abuse still continued in a way, even after I had left the relationship. When we were at home, I felt like I was always walking on eggshells, always worried what his mood was going to be, what side of the bed, as such as you say, he wakes up on. Always just worried that something was happening. I would say I was surviving. I wasn't even living in this relationship. I was just surviving. I felt safer when he wasn't at home. When home is supposed to be your safe space, I never felt safe when he was at home. He would also do things like get my phone and read through my messages, through my emails, and then hide my phone so that I wouldn't even know that he'd been through it. And then he would talk about plans that I'd made with the sibling and say I couldn't even go before I ultimately asked for permission. Or times he would say I could go and then rock up to where I was at the family event, or whether I was shopping with my sister. This one time I do recall though, I was texting my sister and it had auto-corrected, I don't even know what word, but it auto-corrected something to the name Joe. And from that, you can imagine he thought I was cheating on him and had another boyfriend called Joe. So then I was ultimately beaten for something that I had no control over, and it was my phone that had auto-corrected this name to Joe. I used to always say that I could win an Oscar for the abuse that I was suffering at home, because I would still go to work, I would still smile, I would still pretend that nothing was happening and that everything was all okay at home. But I also feel I had to do that, because if anybody had known what was going on, I would have been punished for it, and it would have been my fault. There were people, I guess my family and friends, who knew what was going on, but it was hard for them to approach me and to ask me what was going on, because when they did, all I did was defend him and get in a defensive mode to them and yell and scream at them, saying, how dare you say that this is happening? As Alison mentioned before, the fear. Not only do you have the fear, I guess, of leaving, but there's also the fear of what can happen, the consequences as such of leaving. I did once threaten to leave, to which she said, if you ever leave me, I will kill your family, or I will kill you, and somebody in this family will die. I have quite a few siblings and my mum, so he threatened that. But he also threatened to throw acid in my face. That threat was, if I ever tried to leave him with the children, nobody would want me because I would be so ugly. My nickname was actually Piggy and Fatty, so I got a lot of that every day, the emotional abuse, the put downs every day, telling me I wasn't worth it, that nobody would want me, as I said, that I'm just fat and just, shouldn't be in this world. So when you hear that every day, you start to believe it and you start to feel that's who you are. So as I said, the fear of leaving, you get threats like that, but it's also the fear of the unknown. How am I going to provide for my children? Where are we going to stay? How am I going to continue working? Is he going to show up at my new place? Is he always going to be around? So there's a lot of fear, I guess, also of the unknown. I did leave once and I went back also, though, because as weird as this sounds, it was easier to stay in that relationship with him and be in that relationship because I knew what was happening. I knew how to read his moods. I knew if a day was going to be a bad day or if it was going to be a good day. And even though I was working and through all of this still and he wasn't, it was weird that it's a weird feeling. I'm sorry, I don't know how to explain it in any way. It's just knowing, I guess, that he was always there if I needed him, which sounds it sounds very weird. It's like your heart and your head don't connect, even though one's saying it's wrong and the other is saying, but I love him and I want to stay with him, and it doesn't work. And for me, I also think that was because I wanted my children to have the perfect family. I grew up, my parents separated when I was 2 years old, so I wanted my children to have that whole family unit, I guess, of mum and dad living together, and everything was perfect for them, which is, I guess, a reason why I stayed also, because I needed to create that for them. But my children were also the reason, I guess, that I left, because the abuse of me constantly fighting with their father, or the put downs he was saying, and running out of money or running out of food where we couldn't where we couldn't eat, and there were points where I'd, you know, have to starve so my children could eat, was rubbing off on them. So even though they were my reason to stay, they were also my reason to leave. I did feel crazy at times. You know, when this was happening to me, we didn't have some of the social media that we have these days. So I wouldn't say that. He wasn't able to track me in a sense by putting on a tracker, or, you know, making me share my location with him on Snapchat, or downloading an app to follow where I was going. But as I said, I always had to sort of ask permission for where I was going. And if he messaged, I always had a minute basically to reply to him. So there's a lot of silent abuse that happens in family and domestic violence. A lot of stuff that we don't share, and because it can't be seen, sometimes it's difficult to be believed as such, because sometimes it's hard to prove what coercive control is and what sort of emotional abuse is if there's no sort of physical scar. So that's kind of a very quick cut down of the 16 years of my life of family and domestic violence. And as the tagline for this campaign is, it doesn't have to be physical. Coercive control is family violence. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Cherie. We really sincerely appreciate you being here with us today to talk about your experience of family and domestic violence, but particularly focusing on coercive control. I think that it helps centre all of our efforts back to what it is that we're trying to achieve, which is to raise more awareness about the less obvious and often more insidious forms of family and domestic violence that aren't as easily recognisable, but certainly have such a significant and damaging impact, and are such a key feature of many victim survivors' experiences of family and domestic violence. So thank you very much for sharing your story with us at the conclusion of this webinar today. And I also wanted to extend thanks to our other speakers that we have had this morning, Nadia and Almora from the Department of the Premier and Cabinet, Commissioner Caddy Kraslin from Commissioner for Victims of Crime, and Dr. Alison Evans from the Centre for Women's Safety and Wellbeing. So we do have some time set aside for questions and answer, and I can see that there are some questions that have started to come through. So we will work through those, and I will direct traffic, so to speak, and invite our speakers to answer questions. So please, if you've got questions in mind, add them to the chat. We'll start from the top. And the first question that I can see, I'll probably direct to our DPC colleagues, Nadia or Almora, and it relates to whether or not there are campaign resources translated into languages, and particularly the languages noted here are Sinhalese, Tamil and Urdu. So Nadia or Almora, could I get you to speak to whether or not we have campaign resources translated in language, please?
Hello, it's Almora here. Thank you so much for the question. So I can confirm that we currently have 10 languages translated into 10 different cold languages. At the moment, these are Arabic, Hazaragi, Italian, Karen, Korean, Punjabi, simplified Chinese, Thai, traditional Chinese, as well as Vietnamese. And those are currently available on the website. And in regard, we are also looking at some additional languages that we are going to develop. And just give me one moment. I was going to do a very quick review to see if those ones are currently on there. And at the moment, those are not, but if you are able to send through any information just in regards to the community numbers of those language groups in WA at the moment, we can definitely take them into consideration. And as well as any other feedback or ideas as to how we can better support communications to these community groups. We're not necessarily going to be able to deliver on everything, but we would love to hear suggestions and recommendations, so we can definitely consider how we can do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Almora. That's great. Oh, sorry, Nadia.
Sorry, yeah, and as Almora said, we're actually in the process of translating another 19 languages So yeah, any further languages, we're always open to doing those.
Thank you, Nadia and Almora. And I think displayed on your screens at the moment is an inbox. So if you've got suggestions as indicated by Nadia and Almora, please feel free to send them through to that inbox and we can make sure that they get passed on. So thank you both for that update. The next question / comment is from Penny Fagan from Your Toolkit. And I think probably most people can see it on their screens. It's not so much a question, Penny, so I'm not going to read it all out, but it's really, I guess, just acknowledging and promoting that on the Your Toolkit website, which is one of the links that's been embedded in this presentation, so people will have access to it when we send it around, there is a coercive control self-assessment tool. So it's just another resource that we can promote, and it is certainly promoted via the Campaign Hub. But since being launched in November last year, the Coercive Control Self-Assessment Tool has had 8,873 submissions. So great to see that the resource is available, but also that it is really being accessed and usefully used by members of the community. So thanks, Penny, for offering that detail. And when we send the slides around, I might add your whole comment because you've got some other great information in there about the resource and considerations. So thank you for sharing that with us. We've also got a question to Caddy Kraslin. Caddy, if you are still online, and it's really about if there's a ready-made resource or information that's currently available that could be disseminated to the sector about that timeline for criminalisation of coercive control. But it may be the case that we actually don't have Caddy with us anymore. So Claire, I might take that one on notice and we will come back and answer that question and provide the answer when we send around the slides. And if that information is readily available in a ready-made product to share, then we will share it when we disseminate the slides at the same time. So just going to pause there and see if we get any other questions come through. What I might also invite is, I think what we've been aware of in development of this campaign, and part of the reason why we wanted to host this webinar today, is that as we encourage and support the community to improve their awareness and understanding of coercive control, we expect that that then might start to become a more common part of victim survivors' disclosures and descriptions of their own experiences. And I guess I've just wanted to encourage that as services see that and experience that, if that in itself presents gaps in respect of information or tools or resources, then please feel free to provide suggestions through to us at this email address. There'll certainly be things that are relevant across many of our reform activities, as everyone would know that we are looking at our risk assessment frameworks, the way that we share information, the way that we support and develop workforces, including through training, and also the ways that we manage risk. And coercive control will have to be and will be a key focus area across all of those things. So you know, we'll certainly be keen and happy to hear feedback about ways that we could better support all different types of practitioners to support victim survivors around their experiences of coercive control. So it doesn't look like we've got any further questions. Probably just another comment reiterating the value of having some information disseminated from the Office of the Commissioner for Victims of Crime. So we'll take that on notice and we'll action that. So I am going to close off the webinar today. If you do think of a question or there's anything that you would like to ask after we've closed off, then please send it through and we'll make sure we get a response back to you as quickly as possible. As is normal practice for our webinars, we will circulate the slides, but we'll also make a recording available for you to share with your colleagues if and when they have an interest in watching. So If I can just take a minute again to thank our speakers today, particularly to Cherie, who's taking her personal time to share her experience with us. So Cherie, thank you very much for talking with us this morning about your experiences of family and domestic violence and coercive control, and also to our other speakers, Almora, Nadia, Caddy and Alison. We've really appreciated your time, and I hope to everyone who's joined us that you found the content and information useful. So thank you very much. Bye everyone.
Thank you, bye.
Thanks, bye.